All right, Melissa, I think we're ready to go. All right, perfect. So thank you again for those that have been able to join us today for our request for application work group meeting as part of the Youth Development Council. My name is Paul Sell, and we will go ahead and get started with today's meeting. And as people are updating their titles in Zoom would be great as well. Melissa, if you want to go to the next slide, and I will turn it over to Sally Deck. Sally, you're muted.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. And yeah, just a quick run through on today's agenda. We'll go through some introductions, where we'll talk a little bit about just a review of the work group structure and the agreements that we have. We'll do a recap of our most recent meeting, which was on August 27th. We will then go through our topics for today, which is we're going to cover some definitions and some award ranges for our grants. We'll talk a little bit about application limits and limitations and restrictions on our awards, as well as some updates to the age ranges on our youth grants continuum. Next slide, please. So let's just run through some quick introductions. We'll do YDO staff first. I'm Sally Deck. I'm a grant manager and program analyst for the Future Ready grants. And I would call on Cord Bucher next. He's the one who just popped into the chat that said he is listening only. He is busy with some family stuff today. I believe he has a little kid at home with him. So skipping over Cord, next YDO person, Jared, you're next on my screen.
Good morning, everyone. Jared Shaw, Grant Manager and Workforce Analyst at YDO, and I will pass it to Bill.
Bill Hansel, Youth Development Oregon, Grant Manager and Data Lead, and I'll pass it to Abraham.
Hello, Abraham Magana, YDO, Grant Manager and Operations Analyst. I'll go ahead and pass it to Panasia.
Thanks, Abe. Tanasia Bishop with YDO, Youth Grants Administrative Specialist. I'll pass it to Melissa.
Thanks, Tanasia. Melissa Gallardo, I'm Executive Support for YDO. Brian.
Thanks, Melissa. Brian Detman, Youth Development Oregon Director. Appreciate everybody being here. Appreciate the team, Sally and Paul and all their grant managers for all the work leading up to today. Who should I pass it to next?
I'll take it. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
I failed to say in attempting to introduce Cord Bucher, he is our Deputy Director, and we are also glad to have him here with us today. I'll turn to our Youth Development Council members. And so, Sam, if you can turn on your camera and come off mute and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, everybody. Sam Cole from Oregon Department of Ed.
Thanks, Sam. I also see Zan.
Good morning. Zan Ojiro, Youth Development Council member, and I'm pretty familiar with the processes for our grant making.
Thanks for being here. Molly, did you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Molly Burns, Grant Manager and Re-engagement Analyst.
Thanks, Molly. Next on my screen is Julie Mitchell.
Hi, my name is Julia Mitchell. I am the Chief Operating Officer at POIC.
Thank you, Julia. I also see Nicole.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Sellinger. I'm the Grants Director with Project Youth Plus. I'm very familiar with the grant application process, but not familiar with this back-end RFA, so I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. Destiny.
Hi, everybody. Sorry. Destiny Mayembo. I'm with Impact Northwest as the Assistant Director, and I'm pretty familiar with the grant process in our FRA as I was part of that process this past round. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And Tiffany.
Sorry, my camera's not working. I'm Tiffany Clapper. I'm the principal of Winter Lakes High School here in Coquille, Oregon. And we used to have access to this grant, and we were not awarded it last year or the last time. So I'm just trying to get some more information to be able to see if we can get awarded next time.
We're glad to have you. And it looks like someone else just popped on, Cheyenne.
Sorry I'm late, coming from another meeting. My name is Cheyenne Nichols. I'm a program director at Maslow Project in Southern Oregon. We serve Jackson and Josephine County, and we are a current recipient of YDO's grant.
Excellent. Is there anyone I missed? No, the thumbnails bounce around a little bit. Is there anyone else who is here? I don't see anybody or hear anybody. Melissa, can we go to the next slide?
Did Conrad introduce himself? Maybe
Yes, thank you for the.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Conrad.
A lot of people here. Yes, Conrad Hurdle, Managing Consultant of FC Hurdle Consulting LLC, supporting schools and youth organizations within the Portland area. So thanks for the welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, Brian. All right. Is there anybody else I missed? Are we good? All right. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time to be part of these conversations. The works group structure that we have is that these conversations are recurring touch points for all of the stakeholders to be able to talk about the 25-27 youth grants RFA components. And so we have council members, we have staff, we have other stakeholders, members of the public who have come to these conversations, and they've all been really useful and helpful conversations that we've had. These are non-binding dialogues that are intended to inform our decision-making and to keep our RFA development processes both transparent and also moving forward on a timeline. So we are intending to be as open and clear as we can be with who we fund, who we are, what we're doing, the scope of our grants, and also how the RFAs get developed for each of our grant initiatives. Next slide, please. We made some agreements in one of our early meetings, and so we agree as a group to keep the discussion and the sharing to our current agenda topic items. We will use the 25-27 RFA continuous improvement areas as well as the YDO equity lens to guide our discussions. We also agree to give YDC members and invited participants priority during the discussions. We really welcome everyone's contribution. We can utilize the chat as well as reaction functions to share ideas, request to share. Don't hesitate to use that raise hand button and to emphasize points that get brought up during the discussion. We agree that we all remain muted until we get called upon by a facilitator and that we turn on our cameras while we're speaking if technology is favoring us. And we agree that we will stay committed to our allotted time as far as share out goes and the conversation that we're having so that we can then continue to stay on our timeline. Any questions about the last two slides? All right, hearing none, Melissa, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So to do a recap of our last conversation, we met on August 27th, and we talked a lot about our evaluation processes. And the proposed updates that we have to our evaluation process include that the folks who review each application are being named evaluators in this conversation. And so the evaluators are independent reviewers of individual applications. And that means that there will not be the teams that we have used in the past, but that evaluators will individually be assigned to applications. Evaluators are likely to be assigned somewhere in the neighborhood of 10, maybe even 15 applications, but we like to ensure that they have at least 8 so that they have a good idea of what's in the pool. And a minimum of 3 evaluators will score each application. So the assignments will come out of evaluator pools. So we'll have a pool of evaluators assigned to each RFA, and applications will be randomly assigned to evaluators. In the event that there's a conflict of interest when an evaluator begins to read through an application, if they say like, oh, wait, this is actually my best friend's organization, they agree through the conflict of interest form that we have everybody sign at the beginning, that application then would go back into the pool and then would be reassigned again randomly to available evaluators within that pool of that RFA. And then because individuals will be assigned to the applications, then there won't be the tabulation meetings or the teams that have been used in the past. We have come to the point where it is functionally burdensome and holds up the process in having those additional meetings. And then we did not have evidence that they were helpful. So we have also created some proposed evaluation process guidance. And so the process will be outlined in our RFA so that we have consistency and also transparency as to how these processes will work. And so we will have the guidance internally that will talk a little bit about like the evaluation assignment processes so that that's then something that everyone knows will be applied universally and across the board. And that there will be guidance around applications that require a reassignment or a rescore. So that would be if an evaluator has applications assigned to them and then for whatever reason cannot evaluate them, if they get abducted by aliens or whatever, we need to reassign those applications and ensure that the applications get evaluated in a timely manner. And so we'll have processes about ensuring the fairness and randomness of applications being assigned to evaluators. We also will have internal guidance around evaluators being contacted during the evaluation window, so the window within which the evaluators have time to review the applications. And then we'll also have internal guidance around processes to address unexpected factors that might arise during the evaluation process. All of these are within or to keep us on time so that we can meet our goal, which is to begin our intent to awards in mid to late summer. So the first grants, and if you scroll back to see other recordings of all of our previous meetings, you'll see that we have a timeline of when the RFAs will be released, and that is then the order in which intent to awards will roll out. And so our hope is that in mid to late summer, we will begin our intent to awards with the re-engagement opportunity grants, not that raw grant that you see on the slide. Any questions on this slide? Or Paul, if there's anything that I went over too high of a level and we need to delve into some more details. All right, I think we're good. Melissa, let's go to the next slide. So this is another kind of recap. This information is also available in the recording of the August 27th meeting. And this is some information about our current grants. So the 2023 to 2025 RFA application and awards. So in spring 2023, we had more than 400 applications submitted across the 3 RFAs. So the 3 RFAs are the community investment, the re-engagement, and then also Future Ready, which is the workforce grant that is currently being funded. So in 2023, we had more than 400 applications and almost $80 million in total requests, and more than 240 organizations applied. And some of them submitted multiple applications to be able to get to that 400 number. So our awards for the 23-25 biennium included 81 community investment awards, of which 70 were community investment awards and 11 were workforce. So specifically targeting that programming around workforce development. We also had 29 Future Ready awards. And so that the 29 Future Ready awards plus the 11 workforce awards means that we awarded about 40 workforce development style awards. We also had 31 re-engagement opportunity grants, and 105 total organizations were awarded, equaling almost $30 million in total grant awards. So only about 37% of applications were awarded across the 3 RFAs. And that's something that we hold that information, and what we hope for is that we will continue to be as fair and equitable as possible because we recognize that we do not have enough funding to meet the need and demand across the state. So in 25-27, some notes about our funding. Our funding streams and the actual amounts that we will get funded will be determined during the legislative session. So we won't know prior to the RFAs being written or rolled out how many dollars we will have to distribute over the grants that we award. In 23-25, we had about $14 million in community investment. We had about $8 million in reengagement, and we had just shy of $7 million in Future Ready. Happily, we did not just have $6.70, but we did have $6.7 million in Future Ready. I apologize for our typo. The Future Ready funding is federal funding that is sunsetting. So those funds are non-renewable, and we will not have that $6.7 million in the 25-27 funding. We may have other funding that comes from the state legislature, but we won't know that when the RFAs are being written. We won't know how many dollars are available. Any questions on that slide?
I'm just curious, when you talk about equity, is there any discussion around like a max amount being allotted to one specific organization or?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the like meat of what we're going to talk about. And this slide is actually just the context of
Sure.
kind of why we're heading where we're heading. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you raised that question, and I'm glad that we already have an answer and it's coming. Any other questions? If not, Paul, I will pass it over to you.
Perfect. I like those questions too, that we can actually say, hey, we actually have a slide on that. So it's awesome. So again, my name is Paul Sell, Associate Director here at Youth Development Oregon. I don't know if I said that earlier. I oversee our youth grants process. And so appreciate everybody being here today. So Melissa, if you want to go to the next slide, want to just kind of jump into some of the conversation that we're seeking feedback on today. And to lay the groundwork as we dive into it, a couple proposed key definition updates that we want to be very clear about. And these definitions will be used in the following slides. So full participant data is reporting personal identifiable information, including but isn't limited to a participant's name, their race, ethnicity, their date of birth, identified gender, workforce and education status. There's also some specific re-engagement opportunity and workforce items that will be included in those two specific RFAs that would be defined in the RFA. When we talk about new programming, that's programming that is currently being designed. It's going to be implemented upon the grant funding or is not currently operational in serving youth. So it kind of mirrors the opposite definition of current programming. Current programming is programming that is currently staffed, serving youth, and meets the current RFA requirements. So the easiest way for me to think about it is if we came to visit, we could see the programming being provided to youth with youth present. So it's just trying to be very clear on that side of it. Some of the things that we have tried to address in former RFA processes is around expansion of programming. And so we're still working on it, but basically expansion of programming could fit into an organization's current programming model. If the programming is going to be operational within a defined set of time that we're still trying to determine. So for example, we recognize that sometimes grants are the funding that allows operations to happen. And so you would be at time of RFA, you'd be operating with it. If you were going to either continue that programming or expand maybe to a neighboring school in terms of serving it, it would have to be operational within a defined set of time in the RFA. So we're still working on that, but that's kind of how we would address it. And then if you had programming that wasn't anticipated to be serving youth within that defined timeline, that would be considered new programming. So if it was one of those things that you were trying to get, you wanted to get up, you're really seeking to expand it, but it was going to take you a year of planning, that would fit more into that new programming model. Just is so that we can kind of be very clear as we go through, an applicant is defined as a same organization or multiple organizations with the same executive director and or board. Just that we really be very clear that leadership base is that organizational model standard that we would be looking at for an applicant, for an individual applicant. And then a returning grantee, you'll see that referred throughout. A returning grantee is a YDO applicant that has received the competitive grant funding either in the current or prior biennium. And so for this 25-27 biennium, that would include applicants of this current biennium, the 23-25, as well as the 21 and 23 bienniums. So any questions about the definitions? Because they're going to play kind of an important role. I just realized I'm not saying it out loud. They're going to play an important role in the next like 4 or 5 slides. So I want to make sure people are clear on the definitions. All right. So we're going to go ahead and this next slide is really focused around the proposed application amount ranges. And so this is a new proposal that we're moving forward that would be consistent across all 3 of the RFAs: the community investment, the re-engagement opportunity grant, and the job and workforce readiness applications. And that's we're actually, you'll see that on a later slide, but that's the new name of our workforce development grants that we're talking about as part of this application. And so when we look at that, there's basically 3
Hey, Paul,
categories.
can I jump in?
Yep, go
Can I
ahead.
jump real quick? I think I know we're gonna get into the question that I think it was asked just a minute or 2 ago, but it occurred to me that it might also be helpful, and Sally spoke to this, but I just want to say it out loud, that as we go through the both the definitions which you've covered and kind of how we've defined certain things and also ranges, for those on the call to be thinking kind of bigger picture what we're trying to accomplish, right? And trying to sort of deal with. I think one is we do and are interested in, I use this internally and use this in different venues, like sort of spreading out the awards in such a way that we're able hopefully to fund more programs, more organizations doing really good work. So think about that as we share this information, that I think it may end up in there being a sort of greater spread, which is to say more grantees, which will have some implications. Me and my grant managers are going to be doing potentially handling more work. That, though, depending on the number of applications we receive, isn't certainly a total guarantee. And the other thing that we hope to accomplish with these limitations and restrictions is what I guess I describe as like a greater degree of competitiveness for those what are limited resources. So some of the dollar limitations and some of the application limitations, I believe, will mean that organizations who are applying and won't necessarily be able to apply multiple times, or not quite as many times as we've seen in past biennia. There'll be some greater competition. So I feel good that those 2 goals, one around just sort of spreading the dollars to more high quality programs, and having, I think, a greater degree of competitiveness and fairness in the process, are things that we hope to accomplish. So Paul, Sally, just wanted to frame that up so that folks could kind of see what we're trying to do, and I'll take my hand.
No, I appreciate that, Brian, greatly. We should have turned it to you before we jumped into the definition. So thank you for stopping me. And Sam, I see your question in there, and so we'll address that here shortly too. But one of the things that I think is a challenge as we are going to roll this out in kind of stages in terms of this presentation, is that we may say, oh, that's going to be the next slide. So similar to some of the questions we had before. So there is kind of a layered approach to this, and it's all interconnected. So just a kind of a note for that. So we tried to specifically start at the larger kind of concept across all the RFAs, and that's again, just to make sure that we're clear, as a community investment, the re-engagement opportunity grant, and the job and work readiness applications. And the job and work readiness application is our new name for workforce development, because it's more specific to the scope that we presented earlier on. And Sam, to specifically address your question in around an effort to spread out to grantees by geography, that will be one of the things that we talk about in a future work group, but currently we are anticipating using the same regional design that we've used, which is intended to spread it out across the state with some regional awards, which in terms of the RFA falls into the ranking category of awards. And so that's not the specific topic today, but it is something that's definitely on our radar for that. So when we look,
Paul,
sorry,
can I,
go ahead.
I'll just quickly, sort of reiterating what you said, like, Sam, we've been doing this already. We have had a regional award process, and Paul or Sally or somebody, correct me if I'm wrong, at least in the last biennium and maybe the biennium before that. So the state is broken up into different regions. We award the highest scoring application in a particular region. So good question. And for those who are on the call who maybe didn't know that, we've been doing that effort for the last few years.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian, for that clarification. So jumping back into some award limit conversations, is that we're really designing 3 universal categories that can be applied to any of these 3 RFAs. So we have our returning grantee, and I'll note that that definition was on that previous slide, would be our current biennium grantee during application, or the one prior. And there's some pretty specific reasons around keeping it within the 5-year time frame on that. So a returning grantee would essentially, if they were providing direct use services, if they're providing a proposed programming at time, if they providing the proposed programming at the time of application, so that's that current existing programming, and they're also able to provide full participant data during reporting, they could request up to $300,000 per application. And you'll also note that we didn't put any minimums on there yet. That's still part of the work in progress that we're working on how to design it. Typically, we might have a lower limit of that, but that would be to come at a later time. So that's a very specific population that would be eligible to it, and really that increased amount is that they have experienced YDO reporting, they understand what full participant data is, so that it's basically going to be an easier up and running progress within that. So other or new to YDO grant applicants. So it could have been somebody that applied 4 or 5 bienniums ago to YDO, or they're new to YDO, just learning about us. So basically all of the other type of applicants that are providing direct youth services, providing the proposed programming at the time of the application, and are able to provide that full participant data, would be able to request up to $200,000 per application. And just to kind of note, you can see that many of our last RFAs ranged, for our larger full participant data, RFAs ranged in between 200 and 350. So that number kind of fits right there with a little increase on those returning applicants overall. And then if any other applicant that is doing new or startup programming, maybe it's services that are seasonal or limited, so maybe summer programming. At some point, I'd love to see a winter programming around skiing or something. But so if it's that limited duration or seasonal piece, and or any programming that may not be able to collect the full participant data, so that sometimes at system level you're not able to collect the full system level data, or other programming that is just services for youth that are in the community that are highly positive, highly interactive, but you can't collect individual participant data, would fit into that and would be capped at $150,000 per application. And just a note about that, in terms of the re-engagement and the job and workforce readiness applications, that third category may be slightly limited because of the required reporting that is part of those grants, both legislatively and internally required in terms of that work. So we can go to the next slide, but I want to pause. Maybe we'll just leave this up here to see if people have questions. The next slide is the discussion slide. So I'll leave it there on that. And before I call on Nicole, I want to double check Sally if I missed anything. All right, perfect. All right, so Nicole.
Thanks so much, Paul. We are a current returning YDO grantee, and we've historically applied for about 120,000 for each of our school partnerships. So I'm wondering, given that the cap is 300,000, can we combine 2 different schools within the same program into one application?
Yes, and actually there's a couple slides. I knew these questions were going to come up. This is awesome. So there's a couple slides that will show some application limits here shortly, and I think it'll help further define that. But the short answer is yes, we want to encourage that into combining the grants in terms of those applications as much as possible.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions? All right. All right, so Melissa, if you want to go to the next slide, it is just the questions, but well, again, I'll just pause quickly to see if anybody has questions around those definitions and grant award ranges. All right. So we're going to go ahead and we'll keep the conversation moving forward. I got to change my notes slides here. So Melissa, if you want to take it to the next slide, this kind of goes to Nicole's question as well. So we are looking and proposing some application limits, so application submission limits, and you saw earlier in that recap slide that Sally presented is we had over 400 applications across all three RFAs this time, and quite frankly, some of the multiple of those were duplicative applications that really put a strain on our evaluators in that process. And so we want to try to encourage folks to really focus in on the applications so that we can keep our evaluators focused on the focus, which is evaluating the applications as best as we can. So the application submission limits that we're looking at for each RFA would be up to 2 applications in community investments. We would then stick with the same consistency that we had in the prior biennium of 1 application in a re-engagement opportunity, as well as 1 application in the job workforce readiness. And so just to kind of define that a little bit further, so if you were applying in community investments, you could submit up to 2 $300,000 applications in community investment, but you could only submit 1 application up to that $300,000 limit if you're a new grantee into the area. If you were a current grantee. If you were a new or returning grantee that hasn't had a grant for a few bienniums, then that would be that $200,000 limit that would cap on each one of those. And then further defining that, so each application must provide distinctly different programming in one location. So that could be that you're providing workforce programming and you're providing after-school programming in CI, for example, or the same programming for different youth population in different geographically named service areas. So Nicole, kind of going more in depth into that is that you may see that there's a really clear geographically dividing piece that makes sense to separate your grants. And we would allow that in terms of up to those 2 applications in community investments. It would not necessarily obviously apply in re-engagement or in job and work readiness in terms of that. But again, trying to narrow those applications down and really focus on the evaluation process of the application itself. And then if we go to the next slide, I'll cover this quickly. It's a pretty short slide, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. I was expecting my notes slide to there. So Melissa, you're not controlling my notes slides. So then the proposed award limit across all of it, so going back to one of those initial questions we had, is a maximum award amount per applicant across the community investment, the re-engagement opportunity, and the job and work readiness grants at a $600,000 per biennium. And so that could happen if you were successful in 2 $300,000 grant applications in community investments. It could also happen if you were successful for a $300,000 in community investments and a $300,000 award in re-engagement. For example, it also could be that if you were successful across all 3, that you limited your request to 200,000 because you do all 3 services. You do in terms of community investment work, you do re-engagement work, and then you do that job and career or job and work readiness focus as well. But then you would have to choose to limit that at that 300 or that 600,000, excuse me. A maximum award for any single RFA is simply limited by the number of applications per RFA allowed. All right, then yep, that looks like the last slide before the next question. So you can, Melissa, if you want to bump it to the next slide, we can always go back. I just want to open it up if you have reactions or things that you think we should consider around the RFA application request limits, the application limitations. So that's that duplicative comment in there, or the award limitation. Sam, I see your hand raised.
Okay, so because this is a change, besides today's meeting, have the changes or the new proposals been sent out for grantees comment and to feedback, like via email or listserv? Just wondering.
That's a great question. So currently, that's what this work group is designed to try to get that input into it, and then we'll also be writing the RFAs over the course of the fall. And then in January, February range, Brian and I are talking about how do we do community engagement to continue to get that feedback around this process. in a little bit more specific fashion once it's refined. And then, but in terms of sending it specifically out to grantees or other folks, that's what these meetings are specifically designed for. So we haven't sent any emails out directly regarding that.
So if they don't participate, they lose their chance in these meetings that you guys have been sending out, like it's on them then, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And
All right.
these,
Thank you.
yep, and these meetings are recorded. We probably should have said at the beginning, this is a recorded meeting for it, and these are being posted on our website as well, so people can revisit back within it. And I don't know who came first, Nicole or Destiny, so I just see two hands. I don't have the number one listed like we do in Teams. So Nicole, why don't we, if we can just go with you, you're kind of the next one on my slide.
Thanks. Follow-up question regarding the geographic difference. I wanted to get clarity. Were you looking, if for example, we applied for 2 different schools, same program in one application, would they need to be in 2 different counties? Or are you looking at 2, if we had 2, let's say, community investment applications, each for 300,000, let's just say, would those 2 applications need to be in 2 different counties, but we could have 2 schools in each county?
Great. Thanks for asking the clarifying question. So the county is mainly as an example, because that was kind of an easy geographic divide. The main reason for having a very clear geographically dividing line in terms of it is where that data will be split in terms of your reporting as a grantee if you receive both of them. So as long as we have that clearly defined area with it. So if you're serving 2 high schools, right, that's gonna, and you have that defined area, that's great, because then we know where the data is gonna go, so to speak, on the reporting, if that helps.
Okay, so it could be either a combination or any permutation, as long as it's clearly defined.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Absolutely. And Destiny, thank you for waiting. Like I said, I don't know who's came up first, so thank you.
Yeah, no worries. My question is, say for example, we write 3 applications, all for the max amount as a returning grantee. And if we were awarded that, are we able to maybe pick and choose the scalability per application that meets that 600,000 or dollars that's per agency? Is that a possibility for the grantees to do that if they were awarded all of their, all 3 in categories, I guess?
Yes, thanks for the question. And so being very transparent, and I think that is stuff that we still have to define in the work as we work with procurement to write the RFAs. I think the hope would be is that the intention is that it fits, and if you're an organization that fits in all 3, then you'd want to make that into consideration. But ultimately, that 600,000 would be the cap in this scenario. So then we would have to work with the grantee to make sure that you stayed underneath that 600,000 in terms of how that happens. Now, how that happens would have to be facilitated through procurement, and in terms of what the application, how the application was written, that will be something that we have to define a bit further. Just also to note, and in terms of that sequence, that's something I think as a team we need to wrestle with too, is because the launch of these RFAs are going to be sequenced, right? So they're not going to all come out at the same time. So people will be receiving notification, hopefully, right, as we're proposing, they'll receive notification as those awards are being made across it, and that job and work readiness RFA is a bit of unknown timeline in terms of when that might be released, because that could be this summer, depending on legislative progress. So I do want to kind of pause on it. So it's kind of, I know I'm not really answering your question, but it's going to be kind of defined, but that 600,000 would be the cap. And so there would probably have to be some work behind the scenes with that applicant is what I would assume at this point. Gotcha. Sally or Brian, do you guys have other thoughts to add to that?
I think while you said it there at the end, I think likely if you applied for both applied and were awarded, we would have again, not non-binding, likely say you need to pick 2 of those 3. That's probably because what we try to, I think, like to avoid is if you're saying, well, actually I want to do 200, 200, and 200, but that's not the proposal you submitted. So that scenario, Destiny, is the thing we've got to internally and with procurement. Like, it seems like you should pick 2 of the 3 and you're good. the idea that you, and maybe Destin, I don't know if you're saying this, you want to split things, that feels like a question we're not ready to answer, if that's part of what you're thinking, because again, you submitted a proposal for $300,000 of programs and services and reaching X number of, and that's what you were evaluated on. So something we've got to explore, more to come, Destiny, but I figure, hey, that's one of the conversations we need to have a little bit more internally. I don't know, Sally, I think you had a thought.
That's what I was going to say.
And so the last piece I would add to that is, as we learn that would be something that we will have to work to clarify. So you will see as much as we can clarify in that process. So be watching when those RFAs are released. We'll have to try to wrestle with how do we best address that question, because I don't think you'll be the only one with the question. I think it's probably the easiest way to say it. Like, I think your question is very legit, that we need to figure out how to best communicate what that would look like and our expectations around it, for sure. Awesome. Other questions or thoughts?
Paul, I had a point of clarification. Yeah. Would it then be safe, like in Destiny's example, like if a applicant was hoping to receive 3 awards, that the structure to do it would be best to keep those awards within the 600,000 at that point? So if you're applying for 3 awards, you could do a 300,000 and 2 150s. And if you were successful, that would ensure that you received all 3 awards. If you go over the 600,000, it may not ensure that you received 3 awards, but we're still wrestling with that. But if you want 3 awards, keep it under the 600,000 total.
I think that's a good point, Bill. Thank you. All right.
Bill, this is Melissa. Hi. There are some comments and clarification in the chat from Cord. Do you want me to read those?
I have them up right now. So thanks, Melissa. I got lost in my own notes. I forgot to look at the other screen here. So Cord, I appreciate Cord's note in there, is he just felt it was worth noting that, as with prior work group meetings, this is the first sharing of the information. So like, I think this is a critical question that we want. That's part of the reason why we're having these work groups. So both the Sam and Destiny's pieces, like, how do we wrestle with that? How do we help grantees understand the priorities that we're trying to communicate, and then balancing the priorities with applicants as well? Clarifying question: given a 200,000 application limit for a new obligation and that 2 application limit for community investments, the cap for a new organization or one that has been formally awarded prior to the last 2 biennium applications in SAI would actually be 400,000. That is correct. And so the folks that would have access to that $600,000 cap in CI, for example, would be current grantees, which is again defined as current grantees for this biennium or the biennium previous. So thanks for that one. Thanks, Sam, for the comment. Sam is saying, good thing that the YDO staff are all rational and intelligent people. So I always like a positive comment in the notes. That's always nice. And that. So awesome. Making sure that I addressed everything, Melissa, that you saw. Oh, okay. Nicole, I want to make sure, I think we answered your question, but I just want to circle back and make sure that I did in the comment section, and then Destiny, I'll get right to you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right. Destiny, I think you just raised your hand, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I did.
Okay,
Perfect. I have another question. So,
of course.
So we have bigger organizations, and then after we have programs that, have been awarded, and then we have a program that was not awarded this biennium. Would they, if they wanted to apply again, would they be considered like that new, not a current, like a current grantee, would that then be fold into that middle section of like that new kind of returning applicant, where they would be capped, that specific application might be capped at 200,000?
Okay.
Is that
Great
correct?
question. Yeah, I think I understand that. So let me try to answer it, and then I'm going to make sure that
Yeah.
Sally, you come in and back me up here if I get it wrong. So what I hear is, I'll just say, let's just use Impact Northwest as an example. So Impact Northwest received a grant in a for a specific program,
Mhm.
and then maybe another program that Impact Northwest received did not receive a grant.
Mhm.
And so you're wondering where that would fall, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the one that had received the grant would automatically fall into that, right?
Mhm.
In terms of the 300,000,
Mhm.
where you'd have to look at in terms of that second program that Impact Northwest is looking at would have to be does it match or is it mirror the current programming that is in the RFA, right? Does that programming? So then I don't, yeah. So
Yeah, it's
I would tend to lean towards it would be the new programming,
okay.
but I want to, and maybe something we have to wrestle with is line. So I see some reactions, so I'm just going to pause for a second.
Yeah, I just want to, so if the organization will count as an applicant and thus a returning grantee if they share the executive director or board. So if any part of Impact Northwest has been a grantee, and y'all have, then Impact Northwest is the applicant
Thank you.
and is a returning grantee and is eligible for up to $300,000 for existing programming. If Impact Northwest wants to create something totally brand new, and my joke is always clown school, because I don't think any of y'all are ever going to do that. If y'all wanted to create a clown school, that would be new programming, and thus you would be a returning applicant, but it would be a new program and thus would be limited to $150,000 because it doesn't yet exist. Does that
Thank
help?
you for clarifying.
And I guess the final piece on that is that no one is a returning grantee for our job and work readiness grant because that RFA hasn't even been written yet. It doesn't exist, right? So all of the future ready grantees get to count as returning grantees, even though Future Ready doesn't exist in 25-27, but the applicant organization was previously awarded, that organization understands what we need for reporting, et cetera. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
You said it. I was going down the wrong road, so thank you. I appreciate that. That's why it's two of us, not just one.
So
All
to
right.
recap, it's at the organizational level to qualify for returning, but new stands by itself in terms of you could be a returning grantee, but it's a new program, so you're in that category.
All right. Other questions or thoughts on this? Because we're going to move to something a little slightly different with the continuum update. But any questions about the award limitations and application limits on it? And I should also put out, so one of the things that we recognize as a team with doing this global piece, we have to communicate this out to everybody so you as applicants know what this looks like before the first RFA is released, because that we get into that rule that we can't talk to you anymore, right? Only the single point of contact can be that reference, and so this is something that we want to make sure is very clearly communicated, both in the community conversations that Brian and I are looking at seeing what that will look like in January and February, but then also just as we release the information for RFAs. All right, questions? I think I'm seeing the whole scheme. And Sal, I'm going to turn it back to you because I think Andy may have joined. And we might have had a couple others join. So can I turn it back to you and Melissa to do some intros?
Indeed, thank you. And also, again, to the questions that are being posed, we really appreciate all of the questions that surface. It helps us write our FAQs. It helps us know what we need to be sure that we address. And so all of these conversations are really helpful so that we're well informed of what we need to be sure we're clear about. We talk about these things a lot, all day, every day. And so it might be clear as mud to us, and then just muddy to other folks. So I would love to have the folks who've just joined introduce themselves. I see Andy. If you would, yeah, just unmute yourself and just say hello and what your relationship is with YDO, that'd be great.
Hi, my name's Andy Leonard. Sorry I'm late. I'm doing my youth days Hill meeting talking points. So I'm getting it all ready. Paul.
I like it. I like it. That's awesome.
I'm with the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. I'm the 9 Tribes representative on Oregon Youth Development Board. So popping in, checking it out, and see what's going on.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Thanks, Andy. And then Bethany, it looks like you are also, we would love to have you introduce yourself.
Thanks. I'm Bethany Tramer. I'm the director for the Oregon Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs, and I am just here as a guest and stakeholder today, listening in and potentially asking questions. But so far, so good. Thanks.
Excellent. I almost said you were new, but I know that we've seen you before and we appreciate your presence. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Again, every time the names like scramble on my screen, I lose track of them.
It's hard to keep track. Yes, I agree. I was just lucky that I saw Andy. That's the only reason I knew you sooner. Looks like Sam may have raised his hand.
Okay, so I was just thinking process, because this is new and this is very complicated stuff. My head is spinning. I remember one year or one biennia, YDO went around the state and had like meetings, with prospective grantees to go over the process and so forth. And I think I accompanied you guys to Wasco County, in the Dalles. Are there plans to do that again? Because we're talking big money, like $300,000, change, and that kind of stuff. I know it takes a lot of time and money for you guys to travel, but I was just wondering about that.
That's a great question, and I don't want to. I want Brian to answer that. I think I know the answer, but I want Brian to answer it if that's okay.
I mean, yeah, sure, Paul. I appreciate the question, Sam. I think oh goodness, 2022, in my tenure, since I've been director since 2020, we did do some community conversations, community engagement, sort of speaking at a high level around our budget. We did that in the fall, if I'm not mistaken, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe it was 20, but yeah, the years go by so quickly. So like, when was that? Anyway, I think it was the fall of 2022. And talked about our budget, talked a bit about community investments, and just sort of shared some information. Had many of the folks for staff, et cetera, were there. I think that this fall and into the winter and spring, we also, by doing this RFA work group conversation this summer, and now it's, I don't know, it's still summer, right? And into the fall, this is going to be a primary space in which we can engage with folks around the RFAs and the specifics and the changes and updates. We will then come to our Youth Development Council in December and ask for the council to approve the process that we've designed. So this space and subsequent meetings into later this month into October, I think, are really the primary space in which we'll talk about RFA information. We are also working on a strategic plan, and I think that will be a space that we will do some more community conversation into the winter and early spring. We will, in the early winter, have some RFA information sessions, as we've done in the past, right? I think just prior to the release of the RFA, so that we can bring folks back together and share, here's what's coming, here's what's in there. And you guys, grant managers, correct me if I'm like saying it wrong, but the short answer is, Sam, I think these are the spaces in which we're going to be discussing the RFA. The community engagement work, I think, will come, but that's going to be, in order to get this all moving and going and give people time to apply. I don't think our community engagement is going to, we'll say, hey, here's what's happening. Here's the RFAs that are out there. But if those are RFAs that are open, depending on when they're open, we may not be able to, answer questions. We can just share, here's what's happening. We can't, though, field a bunch of questions and, we get input and then we're going to change things. We'll be farther along than that. But we can share the information. We'll continue to seek ways to share information, but we're getting the input and the questions now. Perfect. Sam says he got it, so I'll shut my mouth. Thanks.
That's awesome, Brian. And just a point of clarification is that the actual technical piece of an information session around an RFA happens after the launch. That's when we actually can't talk about. But the idea would be is to do some sort of hey, this is what it looks like across all three prior to us launching it. So, and whether that's virtual or in person, I think that's still a question that we have to look at budget wise, as Sam, you indicated too. It's not always cheap to have all of us traveling to different parts of the state. So I see a bunch of hands raised, and I think Cheyenne, you might have been first, but I'm just going to call on you just because I can, I guess.
Thanks so much. And I apologize. I have to jump off at noon to go into another meeting, but I anticipate maybe this is still coming, but I'm just curious with the RFA, is the kind of the process of the scoring rubric, does that get shared as well for us to sort of understand what that's going to look like and how, if we don't get funded, how do we receive feedback, things like that?
Yes, it does. And one of the previous, I don't remember the exact date right offhand, but we did cover that in one of these work groups. So if you want to go back, there should be a copy of that. And then it'll be part of the published RFA of like, here's the rubric, here's how all the scoring is. So it's very detailed in that. And then just a little front loading of, I don't want to quote the date. Our next work group meeting, which is in a slide here in just a minute, will also cover our appeal process, which is one of the critical pieces of that work, which will probably refer a little bit back to how you get feedback on that. In the past, typically I've been the person meeting with folks, giving feedback around it. So yes, there should be lots of information around how to do that.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Nicole.
I apologize if you've answered this in another previous work group or not. We have a program that I'm wondering whether it fits into re-engagement or not. Could you describe how re-engagement, like the specificities of re-engagement, or is that upcoming?
So yeah, we talked a little bit about the scope, but just very quickly in general. So re-engagement is one of our most restrictive grants, where youth have to meet a specific defined eligibilities around disconnection from school and high school completion. And then there's some required components around, you have to be able to track that individual participants' progress in education once you get them reconnected, and there's a required education component to the workforce, or excuse me, to the re-engagement piece. But in general, the re-engagement work is specific to youth that have disconnected or at risk of disconnecting from K-12 education without completion.
Can it be that was my memory of that. So our current grants, we actually applied for community investment, and that's where we were awarded. However, they are working with youth who are at risk of disengaging, who have not disengaged, who are still in school but have been flagged at risk. I'm wondering, my memory was that there was some percentage that had to have been disengaged or something like that, or could the entire population still be in school?
So I don't know of what specific percentage you're talking about. What I might suggest is, because we are not in the RFA process, we can schedule a time to meet and connect, either myself or Molly, who is our program manager around that work. Let's before you sign off, let's make sure we get contact information, and we can connect directly about that.
That sounds good. I think my ultimate question was, could we apply for the same program across community investment and re-engagement if they both are, if it's serving high risk?
Yes. So it would have to be different programming, essentially, is what that, if it's in the same location. I think the next slide actually around some age changes that we're looking at may actually help further define that as well.
Awesome. Thanks.
You're doing a great job at leading us to the next slides. I like this. This is good. All right. Any other questions in the chat? Oh, thank you, Sally, for putting the previous meetings. Perfect. All right. And Sally putting some dates. Thank you. Sally's doing a lot behind the scenes. I like it. Oh, this is not mine. I actually officially turn it over to you. I gotta stop talking.
I'll take it. I'll take
All
it.
right.
So in our goals around greater distributing the grants across the state, across organizations, we recognize the usefulness in better defining the continuum of the grants that we offer. So the re-engagement opportunity grant, the age range remains unchanged. So the eligible youth, including their age range, are defined in the Oregon Administrative Rules and Oregon Revised Statutes. So those are not up for us to debate or make any changes to, and we don't see any reason to. So those youth are 14 to 24 years old, and the re-engagement opportunity grants. I was actually trying to find if I could drop into the chat our definitions around that, just for you to have a better idea of what that includes. But we're really looking at youth who are not engaged in school, helping them achieve their high school diploma or equivalent. And that includes that some of what happens within re-engagement is workforce training. And so we recognize that there can be some overlap there. And so for the details of re-engagement, we can, if you have questions about that, we're happy to point you to the directions that would very clearly define what happens within re-engagement. Community investment has historically been a pretty broad and open set of grants. And so we are proposing and talking right now, would love your feedback on updating the community investment age range to primarily serving 6 to 19-year-olds. So 6 is that is the youngest age that our agency serves. And by limiting it at about 19, then we're really looking at the youth who are still involved in their community, in their schools. And then the job and work readiness age range would be primarily 16 to 24-year-olds, recognizing that that is the age where youth most need the essential employability skills, paid work experiences, internships, and other work readiness opportunities. So our intention is that community investment would be 6 to 19, and that job and work readiness would be 16 to 24. And our hope is that will help define for grantees as they're writing their applications, applicants as they're writing their applications, and also that it will help clarify things for evaluators who are reviewing the applications to recognize which proposals fit best with which grants. And we also know that there are exceptions, and that if a youth is deeply involved in a program and they're 19 years old, that they would not be excluded from the programming on their 20th birthday, but that if it is justified and that the agency has been engaged in the conversation about why older youth are served in that program, then that could be approved and that could be awarded. Our thinking, though, is that most youth over the age of 19 and as young as 16, that their intention is around job and work readiness. And while that RFA has not been completely written, it is likely to mirror our workforce readiness and future ready grants that we've had in the past, insofar as holistically addressing the needs of the youth and the development of the youth so that they can have work that is meaningful and that they are in a trajectory to well-paid work that can be sustaining and not merely a minimum wage job. And also that it would be work that they find fulfilling, and that maybe that work is tied to their educational experience. So there are times when 14 and 15-year-olds might be served in that job and work readiness program, but our intention is that the applications would be targeted, that the programming, that applications would be written clearly targeting 16 to 24-year-olds for that job and work readiness. Any questions? Actually, do we have, yeah, let's just bump to the next slide. And then we can kind of identify our questions if folks have them. And also just feedback. We love to hear what folks think about kind of what we're doing. And yeah, so there we go. That we're looking at primary age ranges in community investment grants and the job and work readiness grants. And then also that justifiable age ranges, that if there is reason to serve youth outside of the normal regular age range, depending on how we name that, we're looking for feedback at this point of, what are your reactions to that? Does that make sense? Do those age ranges make sense? What are your thoughts? Or have we so perfectly nailed it, nobody has any comments? Bethany.
I'll just say, I think it makes sense. I think it helps to clarify the intent, right? Is that you're going to be serving this group, and the flexibility to say, we know that we don't want to lose these youth that have been engaged over the term of the grant. So can we continue to keep them involved? Or is there a specific reason why you would need to go outside the range? I think so. Having really clear parameters on what the justifiable means in the application, But I think that makes sense to put the parameters and have the flexibility as an option.
Thanks for that feedback. Any questions or other thoughts?
All right. Well, Sally, I think you're closing us out, yeah? Or am I? Yeah,
Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions not related to the slide I just covered, but any other thoughts, anything that surfaced?
I do.
Oh, please.
I came in late and it felt, I think Brian was just on the cusp of talking about this, but so I work for the Alliance, but there's 12 different organizations that are boys and girls clubs that might apply. And one of the goals of this is, spreading the wealth around the state and around organizations and the good work that's being done. So there's a limit per organization. Is there a reason to say 10 different boys and girls clubs or 10 different YMCAs couldn't each individually apply? Like if your list all of a sudden now includes organizations that look like they're all the same, is that going to skew perception or have difficulty making it through the application process?
Yeah, I think that so we have an alliance that is currently awarded, and I'm just thinking about that if that particular one, if they did not apply as an alliance, I'm not sure that they would have as competitive of a grant application, because when it is an organization that serves youth at different sites, the total number of youth served and the impact is potentially greater than if someone is evaluating just the 12 youth that are getting served in that location versus right? Does that make sense? And so, if the alliance, and I don't know about the Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs, but if the alliance is an eligible organization, right? And so then that's eligible organization is defined in previous RFAs if you want to dig it up. But in general, it's like, do you have the business registry with the Secretary of State, et cetera? That's what I mean by eligible. Then the alliance could apply and then have programming that is delivered in different locations.
And maybe, Melissa, can I have you go back to slide 8? Because I'm really intrigued on Bethany to your thought on it, because I don't think the intention of that it would to not allow the alliance to apply on the individual boys and girls clubs, right? So like so if Melissa can take us back to slide 8 would be great. And we defined applicant, and I don't know if you were here yet or not when we covered. We were rolling at that point, or I was, at least, because I was the one talking. But an applicant is defined as the same organization or multiple organizations with same executive director and or board. So my question would be is in your circumstance, does the alliance have a different executive director or board overseeing the work?
Yes. So our alliance has its own board separate from each of the individual boys and girls clubs.
And my understanding of boys and girls clubs, they each have an executive director and their own individual board.
Yes.
Cool. So that definition might work.
Great.
Right. I was just checking. So yes, that makes sense to you too as well. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, Melissa, for back there. Andy, I see your hand up.
Yeah. I was wondering about the tribes. I know we got a grant with Raina Wiscat. The possibility, I don't know, because when we found out about it, I guess Caroline Cruz, she was surprised about, well, the tribe organization was going to apply, but the funds were funded to Wiscat, and they're not actually a tribal organization within the tribe, but they're outside organization working with kids. So would that be kind of a thing that other tribes would do, like the tribal organization compared to outside, but inside the tribal organization? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That is a great question. Well, I think we're gonna have to wrestle a little bit, but so in terms of the 9 federally recognized tribes, which Warm Springs is one of them, we have and we'd have to add this is something we'll have to think through about how we add the language. So an individual entity or department in a tribe is typically considered individual, right? If that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? Because you have the same leadership inside the tribe, right, with your tribal council, but the individual departments has been considered as separate in terms of it, including through our partnership, right? So if you're writing a partnership letter, an additional tribal department could write a partnership letter in re-engagement as an example, right? And it would meet that qualification. So I think we are going to have to wrestle with how we define that in terms of an entity providing services on the tribal piece. Or I would also indicate too in the prior, which we haven't gotten there yet, around multipliers. Federally recognized tribal applications have received a multiplier before at some point during the awarding process in terms of that increased piece. So that has been a piece that's been in the RFAs in the previous. And the reason I say that is because organizations that are providing services on the tribe are considered a separate organization in terms of these grants, and so they wouldn't receive a tribal multiplier because they're not designated as a federally recognized tribe, but they still could apply as an individual applicant, if that makes sense.
Okay, so is that how WestCat did it? Is that how they did it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So my question is, can they get one and we get one at the same time? Is
yes.
that possible?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I know they were asking me about it, and I says, I don't know. I'm kind of like I'm the middleman, so
yeah.
Asking me questions, and then I gotta ask you guys something. So.
No, I appreciate the question. So currently there isn't any. So for an organization that is serving tribal youth, there is not any multiplier, any advantage in terms of the application. The multiplier is specifically focused if you're a federally recognized tribal applicant.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So that would be knowing your department. That would be your department.
Okay.
Right. In terms of the organization WSCAT that's serving it, then no, they are in the same pool as everybody else. They just happen to be providing services on the tribal land.
Okay. I got you.
Yeah, perfect. Great question.
Thank you.
Other questions or thoughts?
Paul and Sally, there's a question in the chat from Conrad.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Give me just a All right. So Conrad's question is, how do you promote processes for the grant application to have accessible language and not hyper-focused on technical language, which can discourage potential new or smaller organizations to apply? I think that's a great question, right? I think one of the challenges in any competitive process is how do we balance that piece in terms of, the technical language or just the, kind of more, it just here's the programming, right? Language, like this is what we do. This is how we serve youth, and doing that. And I think that hopefully in through the processes that we refine, we are getting that the rubric will really be a guiding tool in that, where reviewers can rely heavily on that, and then how a reviewer reads it, so that the technical language isn't in terms of the rubric identified as extra points, for example, right? Or extra, like that refinement. So I mean, I think it's a great question that we're always wrestling with. I want to open it up to the team too, to see if they have other thoughts on how we address that specifically around that.
I also wonder, is the question actually, how do we make our RFA more approachable and accessible to small organizations?
Yes. Yes. Okay. And yeah.
And that is a great question. And one that I know that YDO has struggled with for a number of years. We're a state agency, we are required to have a whole laundry list of required language in the RFAs. And so it's our intention for the 25-27 RFAs to have like one-pagers, to have this like brief overview so that small organizations can quickly see whether or not they are an eligible organization, what amount they are eligible to apply for, which grant their programs fit well with or are best aligned with, and that we're talking through, like, maybe we can create a flow chart. If you are this, then this or this, with the very real intention of being more accessible to the small organizations that don't have large teams of folks who understand grant writing and are accustomed to it. So yes, and also we welcome input on that, on how to increase our accessibility to the small organizations.
Yes, thank you. That really kind of landed on what my point was around small organizations. How do you make sure that access is there? And what I understand there's grant requirements is spread on state money. Definitely understand that. But in that, how do you balance it out so you're not too far over in the bureaucracy type language where it's accessible for everyday people to understand and they don't have to hire a lawyer to try to understand what is this saying to me? So
yeah.
Yes.
Especially because those organizations might be serving really culturally relevant in culturally relevant ways, different communities that you really want to serve, but yet that language is a barrier to new people coming on board to who might have alternative approaches that the youth need.
And
yeah,
not specifically related to your question, but sort of tied. One of the goals, and Cord and I, this is a project Cord and I have had behind the scenes, is being very upfront about what the insurance requirements are. Because one of the things that we recognize with state grants is insurance requirements can be a burdensome, especially for smaller, newer organizations. So trying to front load that information as well around what those expectations are. Again, not totally related to the accessibility, so to speak, but it is one of those things that we really want to be clear of where our restrictions are in terms of the process, so people aren't caught off guard. They spend all this time for an application and then they're like, I can't afford the insurance. That's not what we want people to do either in terms of that work. So absolutely.
And Paul, I see Bill has a question and Cord has a question in the chat
Yes.
that's directed at you. So I'm going to let you.
I saw. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's go to Bill first, and then I will address Cord's questions.
I just wanted to add that there's a difference between the RFA and the application. And the application we have far more control over in terms of accessible language and the way we phrase questions and different things to that effect, where sometimes the RFA, as was mentioned, has boilerplate language that's like my eyes glaze over every time I try to read it. But that between the two, we really hope that like where we have the ability to do so, like in the application, that accessibility will be equal for everyone. But as was stated before, that this is a great area for input from grantees of challenges around, say, the interpreting the RFA and how we could provide guidance on how to interpret it.
Abe, if you want to add something to that, and then I will address Cord's comment in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we're going to be working, like you said, kind of what Bill said, with procurement and contracts. Oftentimes, like I said, that's the language, the boilerplate language, some of that, government language, and we do constantly have conversations with them about certain things and try to make it so it is more accessible. But just kind of giving you a heads up there in regards to that, it is a constant back and forth with them. And I think these work groups are perfect time to ask those questions, because during the RFA, once the RFA opens, right, we have kind of limited, how should I say, control in that process as it's with procurement and contracts. But I think all this, right now in regards to the questions and things are things that we're going to take into account and make it clear, right? When we have discussions and meet with them about, well, can we change this word, or what does this even mean? Right? Because I think we're in the same boat as you said, like, what does that mean? It's written in legalese.
Exactly. Thanks, Abe. And the other piece that I think can lend itself well to it, and I know, Conrad, we're kind of expanding this question that you asked. So I think it goes to the point of how important it is encourage folks to, if you are considering applying, read over the RFA before that information session kicks in, because that's when the application question submission is open, and so you can ask some very directed questions, and I was like, what does this term mean in the grant? Right, and so we have to then address it in that, again, rather large documents, but it is really an important piece that we want to really work on that. So I do want to get to Corey's question. We're about 9 minutes out, so just doing a time check for all of us.
Say one more thing.
Brian, jump on.
Yeah, I know. Cord, we'll get to the partner question, but Conrad, appreciate the question. Appreciate Bill, Sally, Abe, Paul. Paul offered this. I think it was Destiny. Maybe it was no. Maybe it was not Destiny. It may have been some. It was somebody else who's
Oh, it
like
was Nicole. I think I know what
Nicole.
you're talking about. So it was
Anyway,
Nicole
saying,
because I wrote
"Hey,
it down.
hey, if we need to talk later, it's September, and if there's some conversation we need to have, Conrad, with an organization that you know about, let us know. Contact us, contact me, contact Paul, contact anyone of the, and we can talk to them and say, yeah, hey, Youth Development Oregon, yep, here's our website and here's the thing, and what's the work that you do? Let's have a conversation well before things are even issued, to Paul's point, and help the organization understand, help us understand what they're doing, and then we can at least hit at a high level. Here's what this RFA process, here's what state funding looks like, and here's what it takes. Because it's, as everybody said, it is, it's a different pathway or it's a different set of requirements that maybe folks are used to at maybe the city or county level, or different than what they're doing for a foundation, or right, or maybe even was they're just trying to get individual gifts. The state is a different beast, and if nothing else, we can talk through some of those nuances with folks that you're talking about. So,
right. Thank you so much, and follow will be coming your way. Appreciate the invitation.
Awesome. And Sally and I apparently had the same idea because we were chatting, putting in chat our email addresses. It's also included on the web, on the PDF of the slide deck. So, just very quickly to address Cord's question, I know we keep skirting it, not purposely. Cord asked me to speak specific around being a partner on a grant versus an applicant, and I think that's a really important piece to note. And so, as part of the application processes, we do ask for letters of support or partner organizations that would be submitted as part of the application. And so so you're doing part of the work. You might receive some sub-grant awards from the applicant if they're successful in the application, or if you're just part of providing that service for youth, or supporting that organization in providing that services for youth. The applicant itself would be the person who is applying into it, and they would be the ones receiving the funds directly if awarded, coming to it, and they'd have to provide all of the requirements, like we talked about, insurance and all of those good things of meeting with us of that are required as part of the grant. So, all right, other questions or thoughts? I will say, I think this is officially the longest meeting we've had, right, Sally? I mean, we are
This
close
is
to this.
by far the best conversation we've had. Like, I really
it's been fun.
The things that folks have raised, the questions that have really generated a lot of useful conversation. This is all great.
Absolutely.
And
actually, quick clarification around following up. So when the request for application is officially released, just as some technical pieces around it, when that's released, there is a single point of contact that's listed, and it's typically a procurement officer that everything has to be directed to. That's when you get the emails from us saying, unfortunately, I can talk to you about your grant, but I can't talk to you about anything about your application. So encourage you to please reach out, connect with one of us prior to that. Currently, these RFAs, we're looking at that February, March, April range of that time, right? So if you're doing this before we turn into the new year, or that first month or two in the new year, would be a great time to connect with it. We can't tell you the questions. I'll be upfront with that. We don't get to tell you the details of the RFA, but we can obviously talk about our agency, talk about what the intent of these grants are within that. And so I always enjoy those conversations. I don't want to speak for all the grant managers, but I think we all do in that. So I encourage you to do that for sure. We want you to find the right place to apply for, ultimately, right? So.
And we want you to write your very best application.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's pop up that last slide just so that we have a visual there. That our next meeting will be on Tuesday, September 24th at 11 a.m. And our email addresses are in the chat and also there on the slide for those who are watching this recording after the fact. We welcome your feedback. We welcome your thoughts, things for us to consider, your suggestions for how to make it cleaner, simpler, easier for folks to apply for their applications to land in the correct places. If folks have any other questions, now is a great time to ask. And if not, I think that we can close out, and I wish everyone a lovely weekend. And if you are in the parts of Oregon where it is very, very warm today, I hope that you are able to stay cool.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Hey, see you in DC, Andy.
I got you, man.
All right, cool.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
I have a friend that's over there. It's Bobby Ahern. He used to work with Wyden
Oh, cool.
there, and he's from Madras. And actually, I played with him in an alumni